the Serious Fraud Office was wrong to drop a corruption investigation involving an arms deal between BAE Systems and Saudi Arabia. That's the verdict of two judges at the High Court who said that Tony Blair's government and the Serious Fraud Office gave in too easily to pressure from the Saudis. At the time, the government said the inquiry could undermine cooperation with the Saudi government on fighting terrorism.
A £43 billion deal to sell fighter jets to Saudi Arabia. It was the biggest arms contract in British history. It was also the focus of a fraud investigation that could now be reopened following today's decision in the High Court, a victory for campaigners against the deal. In 2004, the Serious Fraud Office investigated, but the government claimed the Saudis would stop cooperating in the fight against terrorism unless the inquiry was called off. The Attorney General, Lord Goldsmith, announced that the SFO probe was being halted.
Continuation of the investigation would cause serious damage to UK-Saudi security, intelligence and diplomatic cooperation.
That decision led to protests and a legal challenge. Today, the High Court said the SFO's decision to surrender to Saudi threats invited dismay, if not outrage. The judges in the case said no one, whether in this country or outside, is entitled to interfere with the course of our justice. It is the failure of government and the defendant to bear that essential principle in mind that justifies the intervention of this court. So, will BAE now face further questions about the deal? The SFO says it is carefully considering the implications of the judgment and the way forward. Ben Gagan, BBC News.
Well, watching that with me and here to comment is the barrister Jonathan Fisher QC, who is also a director of the Fraud Advisory Panel. Good to have you with us.
Thank you, Hugh.
Were you surprised by the language that we saw today on this judgment?
Yes, I mean, the language is clearly very strong. It's ferocious in part, and reading it through, in parts, it's a devastating critique of the way in which the decision was made on the part of the Serious Fraud Office Director.
And when you look at the balance of responsibility, where do you think people will be feeling more awkward this evening, within government or in the Serious Fraud Office?
I think that's very difficult to answer. I would expect the feeling to be one of sorrow at the way in which the matter's been handled and the way in which it's come to light. I think it's very difficult to start apportioning quote-unquote blame on, let us say, the Director or the Attorney General or the Saudis. One has to take a holistic view.
And in terms of political pressure from wherever it comes, I mean, whether it's from the Saudis or whether it's from the government, are we saying that the Serious Fraud Office was in effect in a very difficult position when this happened?
Well, certainly I would see it in that way. If you read the judgment is clear that the Director should have looked carefully at what was being put to him, and in terms of the judgment, a little more carefully than he did.
Was that Director in a position to say, no, I've listened to what you've got to say, I'm going to pursue this in any case? Was he in a position to do that?
Yes, I mean, as a matter of law, the decision whether or not to commence an investigation and indeed subsequently a prosecution is a matter for the Director of the Serious Fraud Office. He is subject to the superintendence of the Attorney General, and obviously he has to work within those parameters. But I think it's right to say that you must appreciate, and the country must appreciate, that the Serious Fraud Office is handling some of the most complex cases. And it's right that there are cases that arise when they do arise in a political context, and we can't pretend that that's not happening. So these cases are difficult.
They certainly are, and as you say, I mean, we imagine that people might be feeling slightly sensitive about this evening. Does it mean, though, Jonathan, that this can be picked up again? Can this inquiry be reopened?
Well, as I read the decision of the High Court, the Serious Fraud Office is going to have to look at this decision again, and they will clearly have to reappraise the circumstances. Now, whether or not they subsequently come to a different decision is, of course, another matter. It seems to me that it will be difficult for them to press ahead with an investigation and subsequent prosecution, although, of course, that's a matter for them. But one must appreciate that, first of all, there's a potential staleness beginning to set in here. This is all taking an enormous amount of time. And, of course, one mustn't forget the position of potential defendants, BAE Systems, on the end of this, who had been informed that the investigation had ceased, And from their perspective, they may well say, well, you know, we had a legitimate expectation to believe that this was all over. So I don't think it's quite as simple as all that.
I take that last point, and I mean, you make that very clearly, but just a final thought, would you not think that for the credibility of the Serious Fraud Office, it would be in their interests to pick it back up again?
Well, in terms of credibility, one has to again take a very broad view. The Serious Fraud Office, along with other investigating authorities, are looking very carefully at the whole issue of corruption in a number of cases. This decision, I'm sure, will add impetus to their work. And it's right to say that the country, although hitherto has had a poor record in terms of its investigation of prosecution of corruption cases, this decision, I'm sure, will encourage the authorities to take let us say, a more proactive view in the future.
We'll see what that is. Jonathan Fisher, good to have you with us.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you very much.